Jesus' transfiguration on the mountain and the change that took place. Change. We church folks just love change, don't we? Well, maybe not so much. I remember George Carlin, the comedian, had a routine where he said, I put $1 in a change machine, but nothing changed. Change is not always welcome. It's seldom easy, but if there's one thing we can be sure of, it's this. Things will change. You know, I've always wondered why so many of us are so resistant to change. And it seems like the older we get, the more we resist it. Why? After all, don't you agree that there are a lot of things that really do need changing? Well, perhaps some of the hardest things for most of us, though, is when we're required to adapt to a new culture or a new way of doing things. Now, all of us have the ability to change, but most of the time we will not do so unless we are forced to do so. Isn't that true? Yet we all have the ability to adapt to changing situations in our world. Well, just consider these circumstances. If we were suddenly to take up residence in a different country, at least, you know, even for a few weeks, it would be necessary for us to learn at least some of their language and customs. Isn't that true? When a family member moves the family and the kids have to go to a new school, they must make new friends and learn the way that things are done at their new school, which is very likely going to be different than the way they were doing it. When a new couple gets married, this often causes both partners to make some very drastic changes in their lifestyles. When they suddenly have to move in together and live in the same household. Most of you remember when that happened in your life, don't you? When we must, we always find ways of adapting. When we are forced, we change. So why is it always so hard to get people to change, even when it is clear that change is needed and will be beneficial for everyone concerned? One of the hardest things to do is to change the culture and attitudes in an organization, especially one that has existed for a number of years. Now, this kind of thing happens all the time in companies and other types of organizations, but changing anything in that environment is usually going to be a challenge. Companies and organizations, they develop their own unique cultures, their own ways of doing things, and unless a crisis arises which forces them to do so, it is next to impossible to cause real change to take place. One former CEO stated that turning an old organization around and enabling it to respond to new ideas and new ways of doing things is like piloting the Titanic in a sea full of icebergs. A new vision must constantly be communicated, and it must be done with a great deal of skill and care and patience. When Jesus broke into the scene in Palestine, he came with an agenda for changing things. He was going to initiate some of the most drastic changes to a culture and a way of doing things that had been doing the same old things, the same old way for more than 1,000 years. The prophet Isaiah even told his people well in advance that God was getting ready to do a new thing. We read in chapter 43, verse 19. And that new thing was sending Jesus Christ into the world to become the sacrifice for sin. Are we then really so surprised that Jesus experienced some resistance? When Jesus went up the mountain with 3 of his disciples in tow, he wanted them to understand that he had come to make some radical changes. Jesus came into a world that had been doing things, as I said, the same way for over 1,000 years. But God was getting ready to do a new thing, to change the way his people would worship him and relate to him. To begin to move people towards these new ways of thinking and doing things, Jesus first had to make the people understand that the current ways were no longer working, and change was needed and necessary. To do so, it was necessary for him to give the people a new vision on how things would be done if they would accept and embrace the coming changes. An interesting fact I learned about this story as I was preparing was that it takes place, well, where it takes place. The site of Jesus' transfiguration took place in the region of Caesarea Philippi, which was not only located in a predominantly Gentile region of the area, but it was also the place of a well-known landmark called the Cave of Pan. According to ancient religious beliefs, this was thought to be the gateway to Hades itself. Now, it is there that Jesus wants his followers to see the contrast between the New World Order he is promoting and the ancient religious traditions and beliefs of that particular area. As they stand by the legendary entrance to the gates of hell, Jesus asks Peter, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter responds, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And then Jesus tells Peter that it is on this rock, Peter, and his confession that the church will be built. And Jesus says, "The gates of hell will not prevail against it." Verse 18. Then Jesus shocks them as he explains that the changes that God is planning to make. There is going to be a radical shift in their culture. While the disciples knew that the Messiah had come to take on evil, they were not prepared for the way that Jesus told him that he was going to do it. His disciples and many other people of his day expected that the Messiah would be a great military leader who would do battle against the Roman oppressors. But Jesus tells them he was going to Jerusalem to die by crucifixion and then raised from the dead on the third day. Well, this is completely out of the realm of what the disciples were expecting. It blows their minds. They just can't quite accept this. Peter was especially upset at this new revelation and responds by saying, "Well, God forbid it, Lord." Peter, like most of his contemporaries, believed the Messiah was coming to free Israel from the occupying Roman forces, not to be killed by them. Jesus tells him that, he's thinking much too small, that he is failing to comprehend the big picture. The Messiah is not coming just to save Israel. Rather, he is coming to save the whole world. And he will initiate a whole new way of worshiping God, of serving God, of how we relate to God. Peter and the other disciples are having a difficult time grasping the concept that Jesus will defeat evil by not on a worldly basis, a worldly way of thinking by using an army, but on an eternal scale through his own personal sacrifice. If any want to become my followers, Jesus says, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. Verses 24 and 25. You see, Jesus plans to take on the forces of sin and death and will defeat them by his own sacrifice, by going to the cross. Now, in a world where violence is the cultural norm, Jesus casts a radical new vision of how things will be done in the future under this new covenant. This new thing that God is about to do will eliminate the need for the sacrificial system to go to the temple and sacrifice animals. It will eliminate the need for a great deal of the existing priesthood. The livelihoods of some of these people will clearly be threatened. Again, is it any wonder that Jesus was met with the extreme level of resistance that we see taking place? Needless to say, for the Jewish people, this is not just change. It is a radical culture shift from the way we've always done it. The kind of worldview Jesus proposes is not about power or control, but about love and serving others. And this is the kingdom. This is the way of living that Jesus laid out earlier for them in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew's gospel was written for a Jewish audience. Hence the reason it begins with the genealogy, to demonstrate Christ's lineage in the house of David as the prophets foretold. It is also why Matthew constantly tries to show a link between Jesus and the great prophets of old, and Moses and Elijah in particular. Matthew wants his readers to see the parallels that exist between Jesus and Moses. Jesus climbs a mountain to meet with God just like Moses did, and takes Peter, James, and John with him. While he is there, he is joined by Moses and Elijah. He is also in God's presence, and the effects of that encounter is clearly seen in Jesus' face. A bright white light, an aurora which lingers on him, like the sun, we read. Just like Moses, if you go back and read to what took place with Moses after he received the Ten Commandments. In Exodus 24, we read that he even wore a veil for several days after being in God's presence. The same effects took place. The appearance of Moses and Elijah, just part of God's affirmation that Jesus is also a part of the heavenly realm. Perhaps one of the reasons Jesus brought 3 of his disciples along was to give them a taste of the glory that Jesus had promised them they would witness, that they would see. In another sense, Moses and Elijah represent the law and the prophets that Jesus claimed he had come to fulfill. Again, the significant parallels between these 3 figures on the mountain are hard to miss. They all followed the Torah. They all were rejected by their people. They all spoke truth to the powerful people of their day. They all spoke to God on behalf of their people. And they all were affirmed by God and gave their lives in the service to God. The story of the Transfiguration reveals to us that Jesus is an important part of Israel's story, both as lawgiver and as prophet. But what Matthew also wants his readers to understand is that he is not merely equal to these great prophets from Israel's history, but far above them. Matthew has already set the stage for this revelation as he records Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard it was said, but I say to you. You see, this is Jesus' way of stating his authority over the law and the prophetic witness of the past. As Jesus states, he does not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. And he calls his followers to not just merely live by the letter of the law, but by the spirit of the law, by its intent. But old habits and old ways of doing things die hard. Change, especially the radical change that Jesus is trying to usher in, is very difficult for his people to accept. Many see the Transfiguration event as a foretaste of the resurrection that will take place. At this point in time, his disciples won't really understand what they have witnessed. It will only be after the events of Easter morning occur and their witness to these things that they begin to connect the dots. Business, marketing, and restructuring experts tell us that changing the culture within an organization involves multiple modes of communication and the development of new habits. Within any business or company that exists for more than just a few years, there are always those folks who will resist change, who want to go back to the way we've always done it, especially when someone tries to initiate change. The culture within most churches is steeped in tradition, and it's usually very resistant to change. But we Christians are following one of the greatest change agents that has ever existed in all of history. As Christians, we are called to follow Christ's example of self-sacrifice and service to others. Isn't that true? So why do we exist as a church? Why do we exist? What is our goal? What is our purpose? What are we trying to achieve? If we can agree that our main purpose is to make disciples for Jesus Christ and help those folks get connected to God, then shouldn't we be willing to sacrifice our personal preferences or to change almost anything in order to achieve those goals? I hope so. Let's pray. Loving God, we thank you for this church, for all that it means to us. We thank you for your word, which guides us and reminds us that the greatest purpose we have in this life is to follow you and to share our faith with others. Lord, please help us to do that, to be open to new ways of doing things and new ideas, so that we might be more